So thank you again for joining this morning. Again, just for the benefit of the recording, this is our pre-proposal bidders conference for RFP 2023-08 for Clean Energy Ombudsperson. My name is Josh Ryer. I'm the Managing Director of Technical Staff here at Puro. We're really excited that folks are interested in this opportunity, as it's really important to make sure that we have a smooth and successful transition through our clean energy programs, and as they continue to grow, we are successful in efficiently and effectively deploying clean energy through those programs. So that next slide, please. Great. So I mentioned at a high level the importance of the ombudsperson to making sure that our state's clean energy programs are as effective as they can be. Specifically, this RFP is requesting the ombudsperson to help us with three specific programs. The first is called NRES, or the Non-Residential Energy Solutions Program. The second is RRES, which is the Residential Renewable Energy Solutions Program. And the third is the SCEF, which is the Shared Clean Energy Facility Program. So really the ombudsperson will help the electric distribution companies, Eversource and United Illuminating, with these programs. We are not substituting for the important role they play in administering these three programs, but they will really supplement their efforts in three main ways. The first is to help with dispute mediation. There often are motions that come to us and go through the regulatory process that are related to disputes between developers and the utilities who are administering and effectuating our policies and directions. So really the hope would be that this ombudsperson could help more efficiently dispatch with and resolve disputes as they come up, instead of having to go through a longer regulatory process. Also related to that, the ombudsperson would be empowered to resolve questions that result from a dispute. And really what I mean by that is any questions that aren't clear, or the EDCs don't have a clear answer to, or that a developer doesn't believe that the EDC came to the right conclusion in their answer. Really, the ombudsperson would be the first point of contact to help provide clarity to both the EDCs and the clean energy developers. And then also, as Julia will get into a little bit more detail in a second, the ombudsperson will also help review and approving project extensions. We've received in our legacy programs, we receive a lot of these requests, and they of course take time and effort and go through the process, to go through the peer process, but also just to even submit the requests. So we're hoping by then going through the ombudsperson, that'll increase the efficiency of the requests. And with that, I'll turn it over to Julia to go over some more of the details of the actual RFP and the role. Julia.
Thanks so much, Josh. So my name is Julia Dumaine. I'm the Supervisor of Strategy and Operations, and I oversee our RFPs. So I'll be providing some more context around the scope of work for this solicitation. So we have broken down the RFP scope of work into three main buckets: general tasks, mediation, and reporting. Josh started to touch on those in the last slide. For general tasks, first and foremost, it will be essential that the consultant understands the current rules and program design requirements of the NRES, RRES, and SCEF programs. We have multiple decisions issued in the past 3 or 4 years that help to provide additional context and understanding around those. So having a background in those programs will be essential. We will also require that the consultant is able to successfully navigate our docket database system on their own, with the understanding that this system is somewhat on the older side, but we are happy to work with the consultant to get them up to speed on how to use it. But at that point, they will be responsible for managing that on their own. And then last, in the general tasks bucket, in our most recent SCEF and our, NRES decisions, Pura announced that it would be requiring the EDCs to develop a joint statewide procurement plan process going forward in order to optimize clean energy deployments around the state at a minimized ratepayer cost. Public Act 23102 recently amended the statutes governing clean energy deployment in Connecticut to allow joint solicitations by the EDCs rather than having them run their own separate solicitations in their service territories. So we directed them by June 1st, 2024 to submit a revised solicitation process. So in that decision, we also indicated that the ombudsperson would assist the EDCs as needed in developing this plan. And so this would be a separate and discrete part of the scope of work, whereas the other tasks that I'll touch on are ongoing in nature. So for the mediation side, as Josh referenced, we do receive many motions regarding different disputes between the program participants and the EDCs, and the primary purpose of the ombudsperson will be to mediate these disputes to reduce the amount of filings that the authority receives on these topics. This also will include resolving any questions that may arise from such disputes, and we would ask that you point to past rulings or existing programmatic requirements and use those as a basis of standard for resolving those. And then last, as Josh had mentioned, when we receive extension requests that are beyond the 3-year in-service requirement for projects procured through the NRES and SCEF programs, we would expect the ombudsperson to determine whether those extension requests have merit and approve or deny with or without prejudice those requests. And then third, reporting. We will, most of this scope of work will not require PURA intervention, but at sometimes the ombudsperson may be required to elevate certain disputes to the authority and provide a recommended solution, at which point we can engage on and determine in certain circumstances whether this is necessary. There also may be a discovery process for these sort of unique situations, and we would ask that the ombudsperson participate in that process to help resolve the dispute or question. And then we will, in order to maintain transparency and a complete record, we will also ask that all outcomes of any adjudicated extension request, whether or not it's granted or denied, be filed as compliance in our in each relevant docket for each program year. And then for a final reporting requirement, we will also look for an annual summary of any extension request denials so that we can keep track of the progress of any clean energy projects that were previously approved, as this is important information for our various ongoing state planning towards our climate and clean energy goals. And so we need to have a complete record of that as well. For preferred qualifications, we ask that you demonstrate your any transferable experience or skills and how it would make support this role. But things that we will be looking for are experience with dispute mediation. Doesn't have to necessarily be with clean energy, but experience in this area will be critical. Energy policy knowledge, specifically in Connecticut. I already mentioned that, we will expect the ombudsperson to be familiar and understand the rules of the 3 different clean energy programs. But it also might be helpful for the ombudsperson to have experience with other New England state programs and be able to apply that experience in Connecticut. We will look for clear communications and experience documenting interactions and collaborating with utilities, as well as preparing compliance communications documents and submitting them in an organized manner to the regulator. And then last, regulatory experience and knowledge of how our procedural process works will also be essential. I'm not going to go through all of the different RFP requirements, but you can see Table 1 in Section 3 of the RFP to look at the all the different components that we look for. We do ask that you prepare these proposals in the sequence given by this table. It allows for us to streamline our review process and get an answer and a selected consultant out as soon as possible. We also provide a cost estimate breakdown template in section 3E of the RFP. And again, this is a standardization so that we can review and compare apples to apples. I will say, per state statute, the maximum limit for each proceeding is $200,000 for a consultant. This is covering 3 different proceedings, but because we can't anticipate how many disputes and how much time each of those will take up in each different docket each year, we will be primarily looking at the hourly rates of the proposals to consider cost effectiveness of proposals. And then we also want to note that any contracted deliverables and budgets are going to be binding in nature. So what you propose and that we agree to will be considered binding. All right, for next steps, this is not required, but if you do plan to submit a bid so that we can allocate staff resources and plan for review, we do ask that you submit a notice of intent to bid. It can just be an email letting us know. It doesn't have to be more formal than that. You can send that to pura.rfp@ct.gov. If you have any further questions that are not addressed today, we ask that you submit those again in email by Friday, December 22nd. We will do our best to respond to those by January 5th, and we will post those both to the RFP webpage and also distribute the answers to any bidders that submitted a notice of intent to bid. Bids are due on January 12th. And again, submit that via email. There is a specific subject line that we ask you use that's included in the directions inside the RFP. This way we can just keep track of all the emails that come in. And then last, we hope to have a selection by early February, and both consultants that have been selected and non-selected consultants will be notified of this selection. So with that, I would like to open it up for any questions that folks may have.
I guess I'm the only one who can ask questions. That's my first question is, where is everybody? I mean, I don't know whether that means this is a particularly tough RFP or there's folks that are kind of logical. They've been involved in the process some way that I'm not aware of already. I got to look through some of the orders, but I really wasn't looking to see if I saw consultant names pop up or something as to who would be the logical folks to step up for this role. And so I thought I would see some on the call today, and so I'm a little surprised I don't see any.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I do, it is the right before the holidays, so I think that may have something to do with it. But that's why we record them and make these available for after the fact.
Right. I do have some actual questions. I'm kind of kidding, but it's a very intriguing RFP, and I guess I've had some initial conversations with team members, and some of them you've already answered, the $200,000 per of each of the 3. So it's additive, I guess, is what I'm hearing. Do you have any sense of what I can't get a sense of is volume. And so it sounds like there was a process that was used, which was filing motions before. Is that a true sense of how many disputes you expect to come in, or you're sort of trying to get them from not using that process and going through the ombudsman? Do you have any sense of what the volumes have looked like?
Yeah, no, that's a fair enough question. I'm happy to answer that. So so historically, particularly around the time when bids are due into and I'm thinking almost exclusively of the NRES program, but this has happened in the SCEF program as well. We'll frequently get questions or complaints submitted as motions when bids are due. So the kind of February timeframe for NRES and SCEF, and then into March, and then there's a second solicitation for NRES that opens up in August every year. So we typically get, maybe I shouldn't say typically, we've occasionally received motions to address one or more issues during that time. So I'd encourage you to look back at, off the top of my head, the relevant proceedings for both NRES and SCEF. It's more frequent with NRES just because of the number of bidders and the megawatt allocation for that program. And so NRES in particular, those dockets are always, the annual review dockets are the year. So this year would be 23, 08, 03 is the docket number. And the requests come in, the motions come in for, like, for example, the ones related to the solicitation occurring this year actually were submitted in 22, 08, 03, because we set the program rules for this year and last year's docket, right? So, but to more specifically answer your question, yeah, NRES, and I think we even discussed in the decision, we're anticipating being the bigger bulk of the work. I mean, as a practical matter, I think the unintended consequence of having a less formal process is that you probably will get more questions than you would through a formal motion process. So I think it'd be fair to gross up the historical number of motions we've received to estimate your time. And then I would just also just flag that I'm sure there's plenty of kind of anecdotal, and when we talk to developers, there's plenty of times that they have mentioned to us being frustrated with responses they get from the EDCs or not getting responses. And so that's not something that we see through our dockets that I would also anticipate would be part of the ombudsman's workload. So I'm just trying to throw out other factors that you'd want to consider. But to the actual disputes, you'd get a good sense from those historical motions that were filed in the NRES dockets.
What is the mechanism for reaching out to the ombudsman? In other words, would that be by people being referred by the utilities or by staff? In other words, could be contacted directly by developers? Would we have to have a separate website for that? Or is it just, they will be referred to the ombudsman by either the utility who's at an impasse or by something that's raised with staff?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It would not be raised by us. It'd be, we would look for to work through some of these questions once we onboarded the ombudsman, say that 3 times fast. Because, what we want to make sure we're reiterating is that we're not flooding the ombudsman with questions, right? Like, the EDCs are still responsible for administering the program as we've directed in accordance with the objectives that we've set out. So the primary point of contact should always be the EDCs. They would only come to the ombudsman after, when the EDCs are unable to answer the question or resolve if they've reached an impasse. So we'd have to think through whether it's the EDCs referring them to you, or if there's just an email address that's listed, a generic email address that's listed on the program websites. But we would look to whomever we retain to come up with a proposed process for that.
Okay. Another question. I'm looking at what skill sets that I would need. Are the issues primarily technical and engineering in nature, or are they more administrative in nature? Because I'm looking at, do I need people with strong engineering kind of expertise that's going to get into the nitty-gritty, or is it more of, this is what the rules say, it's more of a interpretation of code? In other words, do I need a lawyer or do I need both?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I certainly don't want to put myself in a spot where I'm being overly prescriptive, but I would say, you know, there is an interconnection working group and an interconnection ombudsman. So very specific technical interconnection questions should be directed to them. This is really more about the program rules and you know, interpretation of PIRA's guidance. Like a good example of this is we just dealt with for NRES an example of a distressed municipality, which the law very clearly states is, or at least implies heavily, are kind of preferred entities for participating in the NRES program. There was an instance where a distressed municipality actually owned the accounts of a facility that was located in a non-distressed municipality, right? But very clearly, that facility, as the account owners were a distressed municipality, them getting the bid preference that's associated with distressed municipalities is clearly aligned with the public policy objectives, right? But instead of just kind of saying, hey, this isn't currently contemplated in the rules, and we're going to reasonably interpret the program objectives, the EDCs, by the nature of, you know, they're concerned that they're going to get slapped on the wrist by us, right, if they don't do something that we told them to do, because we've already approved the program rules. So they took a, you know, perhaps in my opinion, an overly conservative view of the program objectives and the rules, and said, nope, because it doesn't say you can do that, you would get the bid preference, that's not allowed. I would hope that if that dispute, and then subsequently became a motion that we had to rule on, I would hope that the ombudsman would see the objectives. Hey, we're clearly trying to encourage through this program benefits flowing to distressed municipalities. Hey, that instance clearly achieves that objective.
Right. Do you expect any interaction between the interconnection ombudsman? Would they be a resource for any technical kinds of?
Yeah, that's really good. I would anticipate there being a close relationship between. We just also hired a interconnection working group facilitator that works closely with the ombudsman at PIRA, that works actually in a different division of PIRA. I would anticipate a close working relationship and just referring people to them. But having said that, I wouldn't really, I'm not anticipating at this point, or I don't think we envisioned there to be any overlap. And what I mean by, like, I would anticipate you being familiar, or whoever the ombudsman is being familiar with that group, but essentially just handing them off to the interconnection working group facilitator in that venue, instead of having to, you know, help facilitate a solution that's identified to you. That's not what Cambridge do.
Okay, because that's helpful, because I'm trying to decide who the key players are. And again, I was torn. Do I need engineers? Do I need attorneys? Do I need, you know, both, whatever? And so you're kind of drawing the line that this is really more around the rules, administrative kinds of issues, and not, you know, going into the minute detail about inverters and things like that. That would be handled by the interconnection type folks.
Yeah, and you know, I can see. Yeah, I think that's fair. The only reason I'm hedging my bet a little bit is I could see there being some interpretation. Say there's a kilowatt cap, and it's a question of whether it's AC or DC, right? How you apply it. Like, I could see, you know, you needing to ask the interconnection working group facilitator a question or two like that. But I don't anticipate, you know, for the most part, I'd anticipate you being able to wholly hand off very technical questions to that group and that facilitator.
Okay. And what would you consider dispute mediation type experience? Because that's where I'm struggling a little bit. I mean, folks that are used to being in negotiation type roles, as opposed to being a mediator, which is sort of a very specific, you know, people are, you know, formal mediators. So I didn't think you were looking for anyone in that kind of quite at that level, as someone who would be considered an expert and be on a mediation, assigned mediator kind of thing. It's more people used to negotiating or facilitating solutions among various parties. Is that kind
I think that's fair. We didn't want to get in. The reason we use the terminology we did is we didn't want to get into like, are there equal parties and you're just trying to come to a resolution that works for both. Like that's not really the role or the objective, right? The role and objective is to be able to look at the program rules and help sense, hey, is there a clear solution here that can be implemented that's aligned with the goals that have been outlined in the statutes and the policy documents that are guiding it. So it's not as much like, hey, let's get everyone together in a room, as mediation would be, right? But rather, being expert in the program rules and finding creative solutions that ensure that the program efficiently can move forward and achieve the program objectives. We also, the only thing that I can really, obviously there's some elements of mediation that overlap there, but I think you described it well. Frankly, it's kind of its own. Ombudsman is kind of its own thing that, we're seeing more and more across the country for interconnection and for public policy programs. So really I think we didn't want to pigeonhole it too much and say you have to have ombudsman experience, because one, it's a little bit of a niche, both a niche and novel role is becoming more prevalent, but we wanted to, that type of experience is really what we're looking for. And in lieu of that, anything like what I was just discussing and even mediation experience would be helpful.
Okay, because I'm looking at someone who's head of compliance at a utility who knows all about following rules and how to read rules and how to interpret rules, so that was where my head was at for who would be a good team member. But then again, I started thinking, well, gee, our technical knowledge only goes so far. The term of the engagement, would that be a 1 year round, like to process the next 1 year program? It wasn't really clear how long the term would go.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and fair feedback that we didn't identify that. That's something that we could certainly negotiate, or not negotiate, but just discuss. I think initially we were thinking 1 year, because we want to give ourselves some flexibility to make sure it works and it's a good fit. Because of course, what's going to be really important here is that whoever we bring on is aligned with us philosophically and understands well the objective. Is one thing to have written out what objectives are. It's another thing to understand and agree with them in the same way rather. So yeah, I think we are initially thinking a 1 year period, but we have in other dockets we've brought on administrators for like kind of a 2 year period, understanding that the first year can always be a little bit difficult. So, there's specific things that you run into year one that you might not year two, because you're familiar with what to do, right? So anyway, that's a long answer to say we were initially thinking 1 year. If you proposed or had any thoughts on it being helpful for a second year, certainly you're welcome to include that in your proposal.
It might be helpful more from a risk standpoint, because if you have an absolute cap that you're allowed, for each one, and you're proposing billing rates. So the implication is you have to just handle the whole workload, and it could be more than that amount. So if you don't have an opportunity to later maybe recover, you have 3 dockets, so it should even out a little. You would be keeping track of your efforts in each of the 3 separate dockets. So you may have next to nothing in one docket and way more than $200,000 in another docket. So that's why I'm asking the question. Do you have an opportunity to maybe have it even out over time? But you're looking for a 1 year proposal, I guess, is what I'm hearing.
That was the initial thought. But yeah, like I said, everything you just, if you had additional thoughts or rationale around the second year, we'd encourage you all and everyone else to include that, if it made sense and you can justify it.
Okay. Let's see. I think those were my primary questions at this point. If I think of any, I have a few days to get them in writing, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we appreciate you coming prepared with questions. It helps us think about it in more detail, and certainly hopefully will help others when they watch the recording later. But well, great. With that, I guess we can let everybody go, Julia. But yeah, again, thank you for coming today, and happy holidays.